Record, and here we are. Hello. It is Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern, that is. And you know what that means. It is time for TGI, the greatest indoor reading series, a series started by Trina, what did we decide you were earlier? The evil Kiwi?
Diabolical.
Diabolical Kiwi, just a nickname. I just mispronounced Trina's last name. Hello, Trina Thibodeau. Started this back in March as a way to find some sense of community amongst writers and artistic people during the course of as you all know, very strange past 10 months during which we were not able to go outside, see our friends, go to summer residencies. Those of you who may have released books, I'm sure, found it frustrating because all in-person events have been canceled. So we started meeting here on Zoom every Friday night and hearing from 4 or 5 people. And slowly over time, it has evolved into a nice little community where we can gather each week, particularly during the half hour before the show and a little bit after the show, and talk about things like whether or not we're ticklish and what mean things we said to strangers this week. At any rate, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ridge Cresswell. I am here in Queens, New York. I am a audio person, as evidenced by this microphone. And I will be your host for this evening. The way the show works is we will have writers read, I should say, some of their work. I usually give some sort of response. It started by way of segue and has turned into a just fun space for me to emotionally react. So I've gotten some good feedback over the past week, so that's nice. I do feel like I should say I'm very glad to be here tonight because this week was sillier than, like, I want to just say this. I suspected at the beginning of our current president's tenure that we would see some really dumb bullshit. I did not expect it to be quite this dumb. I know that's like maybe dismissive of the significance of what happened because it is really startling and it is really upsetting. And the police involvement and response, particularly compared to other social movements, is very upsetting. But it is just, it's like, I don't know what it's like. It was like watching a slow motion coup, but there was no goal. So when people got in there, they just milled around and posed. And there was something about that made it so much worse because you got to see that what they stood for was essentially empty and barren. This space and spaces like it are intended, hopefully, to engender the opposite of that. We're going to try to get at actual humanity and real life connection and things that are all maybe not as noisy and attractive to some as, say, flag waving and fireworks, but are also a lot less just a way of signaling that you only care about yourself. So, with that said, I'm going to try not to say too much because I don't only care about myself, and we're here to serve as a forum. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first reader tonight, and I'm very excited to do so based on the titles in her bio. So our first reader is Suzanne Roberts, and she is the author of Almost Somewhere, 28 Days on the John Muir Trail, winner of the National Outdoor Book Award, and Bad Tourist, Misadventures in Love and Travel, as well as 4 collections of poetry. She was named the next great travel writer by National Geographic's Traveler magazine, and her work has appeared in the New York Times, CNN, Creative Nonfiction, Brevity, River Teeth, The Rumpus, and elsewhere. She teaches for the low residency MFA program in creative writing at Sierra Nevada University and lives in South Lake Tahoe, California. Suzanne, you should be able to unmute yourself and take us away.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me, Noli. And it's so nice to be here and see all of your smiling faces. It has been quite a strange week. And I'm glad to be here to listen to some stories. So I'm going to read a short essay out of my new book, Bad Tourist. And there were exactly 2 essays in here that were 5 pages, and I was told 10 minutes, so I chose one. And it takes place in the San Blas Islands. Has anybody been there? It used to be called the Kuna Islands, but now it's reverted to the Guna Islands. No? And I have a show and tell item. So these islands are really an interesting place. They're like an Indian reservation, but off of the coast of Panama. And they're like 300 islands. And the women make these really beautiful textiles. And I have like a show and tell here. And this is called a mola. Can you see it? Yeah? And this is actually the mola of El Baracho, which I mentioned. So I thought I would pull this off my wall. There's kind of a lot of light, but you can kind of see it. So anyway, it gives you a sense of the kinds of things that the people were wearing. Okay? All right. It's called Coming of Age in the Gunayala Islands. It takes place in the San Blas Islands in Panama in December 2009. A woman stood on the dock holding quivering fish by their tails, the scales like stacked coins, the green eyes like marbles. The gills fanned at the useless air. A cage hovered over the water, the pig inside it unable to turn around. Lanterns burned yellow in the filtered evening light. Our hotel's owner had brought us to this island from one of the tourist islands by boat, told us we should see how the locals lived, said there would be a haircutting ceremony, a chance to drink rum with the Guna people. He waved to us as we got off the boat, and we followed a local guide. He said he'd return in a couple of hours. My husband Tom and I paid our arrival taxes and walked through the narrow, treeless streets. Clapboard and rusting tin houses with palm frond thatched roofs leaned against each other, the small island packed so tightly that there was no view from the streets to the sea, no way to know you were on an island, so unlike the islands for tourists, where palms swayed in front of bungalows, steps from the water. Children smiled and waved. They spoke the local language and called the only Spanish words they knew. Hola, hola, nombre, país. They ran past, their laughter ringing through the maze of streets. An albino girl fled from a group of older boys. She wore the colorful molas the girls and women wore, and beads crawled up her pinkish skin. She was sunburned, mottled with insect bites, the pink flares like fireworks. The boys teased her, snatched at her budding chest. Her stringy blonde hair hung from an orange headscarf, and her blue eyes seemed transparent. She screamed as she disappeared down the tangle of streets, her shouts echoing, part nervous laughter, part squealing fear. I wanted to follow them, tell the boys to stop terrorizing her, but I didn't have words they would understand. I couldn't do anything. I later learned that the Guna people have a high incidence of albinism. In Guna mythology, albinos are considered a special race of people with a specific duty of defending the moon against a dragon who tries to eat it during a lunar eclipse. It didn't seem like the mythology protected the girl from this adolescent taunting and mocking, the language of being different that all of the world understands. Earlier that day, I had asked a Guna chief about the laws, about what they would do, for example, if a man raped a woman. He told me that never happened. I asked again, but what if it did? A villager who knew Guna and Spanish translated for us. He told me the chief said they would give the rapist advice. I repeated the answer to make sure I understood correctly, said it back to him slowly in Spanish. Dar consejos? Yes, the translator had said, that is right, but sometimes they also have to clean the streets as punishment. Tom and I ducked under the canvas to enter the tent where the haircutting celebration was underway. We were the only tourists there, but I had learned that sometimes it is an honor to have outsiders at such celebrations. The darkness knitted across the outside world. The backlit sky disappeared. Only the tips of cigarettes burned orange and the flicker of candles, the wax melting into empty beer cans. Smoke hovered, disappearing and reappearing like a memory. A man played a hand flute in the dark corner. Another man shook a gourd of beads. The elders unfolded themselves from the low wooden benches, poured seco Harano into split coconut shells. The men lined up on the dirt floor, clutching their rum. They sang, woo, 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 shuffling around the ground, the earth polished smooth by bare feet. They stooped their shoulders, came together, raised their coconuts, drank. The song, Ido Malando, a chant for health, the dance, an ancient ritual, part bird, part man, part god. The painted and pierced women drank and smoked and gossiped on their side of the tent. Earlier in the day, they were stitching colorful molas, fish, parrots, El Baracho playing a flute. They sold them at the tourist islands. Now they sat arm in arm at the fiesta waiting for the haircutting ceremony to begin. They swayed on their benches, giggling to one another like schoolgirls, leaning into each other, laughing over the din of drinking. The patterned molas, skirts and headscarves with geometric beadings, glimmered blue, yellow, purple, sequins of light interrupting the darkness. A man tossed his cigarette onto the dirt floor, put it out with his bare foot. He poured rum into a coconut bowl and walked around to bring others this offering. Our guide said it was important that everyone enjoy the ceremony, this rite of passage from girl to woman. He said, be sure to hold the rum with both hands. I sipped it until it burned into my throat and stomach, a fire spreading into my limbs. I needed to get some air, so I stumbled out of the dark tent and into the gauzy light, passing two old women. Gold rings hung from their septa, and orange makeup blazed across triangular cheekbones down the length of their noses. One of the women sucked hard on a cigarette, swayed down the dusty street, said, Baracha, drunk. It was impossible to know if she meant her friend she was leaning on, herself, or me. The smoke hung in the air like a question. I returned to the tent, waiting for the girl to enter, imagining the sheared hair falling like rain, signaling her passage into womanhood. She never appeared, and I didn't have the language to ask. I would later learn this haircutting ceremony was only part of the coming-of-age ritual, which lasts 4 full days. During this time, the girl's family, if they can afford it, must feed and supply drinks to the village and to tourists like us. On the 3rd day, the girl's hair is cut, the ritual hidden by a committee of women. If she has already gotten her period, she never enters her own celebration. She sits facing east, scarves covering her head and face until her long hair is cut, leaving only a narrow strip bordering the forehead. The ceremony allows for a long break, so groups of women can peer in to see the girl and drink their share of chicha, a fermented beverage. Afterward, the haircutter finally removes the rest of the hair, leaving the girl completely bald. As adults, Guna women wear their hair short, covered by a bright headscarf. I tried to picture the secret ritual, the 12-year-old girl stone-faced as she watched her childhood spiral to the dusty ground, crossing the boundary between long-haired girl and short-haired woman among her friends and family, hidden, but saved, at least for now, from becoming a tourist attraction. Thank you.
I had to unmute myself. Suzanne, thank you very much. That was wonderful. I love in any kind of writing, but particularly there's something about travel writing with scene setting. And some of the details in there really just, there was one in particular, I don't know why this one stuck out, but candles in beer cans, I could smell very like instantly. I also think, you know, a lot of writing that is about, you know, someone's experience exploring another person's culture can be very objectifying, but it can also be very sort of overly simplistic. And I think what's wonderful about what you just read is that the lesson is that there's just way more going on than you thought once you got there. And, you know, you're told it's going to be one thing, and then this happens. And that is an experience that I think people who've been to another country, another culture, especially off of the beaten path, the manicured parts that are designed to shunt tourists from one stop to another. That's the experience, right? Is one of, I would describe it as being baffled slightly. Yeah, just sort of surprised. So I thought that was wonderful. Yeah, so I don't usually I try to have some sort of question. I don't really. I just thought that was awesome. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself just because we did end up turning off the ability to unmute yourself. So books wise, you have a couple available now, and then this was actually something I thought was interesting. Was so you've done all this travel writing, but you've also published 4 collections of poetry, and I can hear that in your work. I think in terms of the descriptors, the imagery, that kind of thing. Do you find those two to be like really different processes?
I've written poems about a lot of the things actually that ended up in this book, and I like the poem because it captures the image. It's like a photograph rather than a movie,
Mhm.
and you don't have to explain anything. But then there's certain things that have happened in my life where I realize that I really need the explanation and the reflection, which you don't do in a poem, and so I've turned actually some poems into essays where I felt like I had more to say.
Mhm.
I've also written essays that I realized were not working because I was getting in the way of the image, and then I've made those into poems as well. So I think it's pretty similar, and I always tell my students that if you want to be a writer, you should study poetry because that's where you're going to really, get that condensed language and the images and the senses and all of that.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, that's I think also it's a testament to in general, if people are able to try not to confine yourself excessively, try out different things and see what you as a creative person get out of them, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes the work tells you what it wants to be
Mm.
as far as form,
Mhm.
mostly. The work is always smarter than the writer, in my opinion, if you let it be.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thank you very much, Suzanne. We really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks.
And everybody, the information to catch up with Suzanne on social media and buy some of her work is available in the chat right now. I forgot to mention, I try to remember, but I always forget. The chat is a very helpful little window. If you click on the little speech bubble thing, feel free to participate there. It also selfishly helps me to remember lines that are worth remarking upon. So thank you. Anyways, moving right along, our next reader is Jeff Zentner. He is the author of the New York Times notable book, The Serpent King, Goodbye Days, and Rayne and Delilah's Midnight Matinee. He has won the William C. Morris Award, the Amelia Elizabeth Walden Award, the International Literacy Association Award, and the Westchester Fiction Award. He's a 2-time Southern Book Prize finalist, has been longlisted for the Carnegie Medal and UKLA, and was a finalist for the Indies' Choice Award. He was selected as a Publishers Weekly Flying Start and an Indies Introduced pick. His books have been translated into 15 languages. Before becoming a writer, he was a musician who recorded with Iggy Pop, Nick Cave, and Debbie Harry. He lives in Nashville. Jeff, you should be able to unmute yourself and take us away.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. I loved Suzanne's writing, but I also love her book wall. I feel really excited to be on an event with people who have book walls like that. It makes me feel a lot smarter than I probably am. So I'm going to read a little passage from a book, my 4th book, which doesn't come out until August 2021. It's called In the Wild Light. And let me just set up this scene. This is very early in the book. My main character, Cash Pruitt, is a young man who lives in rural East Tennessee. That's the Appalachian part of Tennessee. And he has a best friend named Delaney Doyle. And Delaney's a genius. She's made this important scientific discovery that has gotten her a scholarship offer at this elite private school in Connecticut. And she has told them that she will only accept if they offer a scholarship to Cash as well, so he can come. And so she's just told him about this, and it's kind of sinking in. So that's where we begin. A convoy of 3 black Dodge Sprinter vans pulls into the gas station. In the weeks since Delaney's discovery was announced, Sawyer's been crawling with rented vans full of men and women laden with caving gear. Can't exactly patent something that grows in a cave, Delaney explained, so they're all coming for their piece. The universities, the pharmaceutical companies, the Gates Foundation. Delaney told me the other day that she served a team of French biologists at DQ. They had no idea who she was. Don't tell me you're only going to do this if I do it. Don't be telling me that, I say. Delaney eyes the people getting out of the vans. They should try boiled peanuts while they're here. Bet they don't have boiled peanuts wherever they're from. Red, don't know what I'll do. Mr. Hotchkiss is a good science teacher and he does his best, but you need more than a key to a high school lab where the teacher has to buy microscopes with his own money. You need to do this. So do you. There's a big world outside East Tennessee. You don't like it? You can always come back. Everything will still be here. You know that. I'm happy here. Sometimes Delaney looks at me like my skull is transparent. She can see the thoughts forming on my brain's surface. There are ghosts here, she says quietly. There are indeed, I think. I'm dazed, like I just woke up from one of those long Sunday afternoon naps when it's a moment or two before you can even remember where you are or even your own name. The light is waning. I glance at the time on my phone. We better get you to Noah and Braxton's. I start my truck and jam it into gear. I pull out of the parking lot. You're pissed, Delaney murmurs. She starts to lift her thumb to her mouth, but we lock eyes and she grabs the end of her ponytail instead. I just don't know what to think. You still haven't thanked me, Delaney says after we drive for a while without talking. I shake my head, defeated. Thanks, I think. None of this is quite sunk in yet. I know this because I'm feeling numb rather than completely panicking at the thought of possibly losing her. Delaney stares forward with an unreadable expression. I've always thought she had a strangely elegant beauty, of something being pulled in each direction toward perfect and broken. I once saw a bird that had been run down in the road. It lay there pulverized, but the wind caught two of its feathers and lifted them free of the destroyed body, breathing life back into them. I watched those feathers dancing in the wind for a long time, such unexpected grace amid ruin. Delaney reminds me of that. Couldn't say why. Chapter 3. We met at a Narratine meeting a few years ago. It wasn't the first time I'd ever seen her. We both went to Sawyer Middle School. She was considered a weirdo and a loner, no friends. Everyone vaguely understood that she was uncommonly intelligent. She wasn't known for getting amazing grades, but when she showed up for class, she would perform so well on tests that, as she later told me, teachers accused her of cheating. She certainly wasn't famous for her social skills or really much else except spending a lot of time surfing the internet in the school library and hanging around the science lab. Rumor was she had a photographic memory. True. In another time, she'd have probably been burned as a witch. Hell, maybe now too. There were dark whispers that her mama was a user and a bad one. Delaney's generally haphazard state of dress and put-togetherness and spotty school attendance gave us no reason to doubt. She had that old beyond her years way of someone who's had to parent a parent. I recognized it from looking in the mirror. It made me not much more popular than her. None of the school's best-liked kids had to survive like we did, and they all avoided the stain of associating with us. The basement at the First Baptist Church in downtown Sawyer smelled like a mix of the faintly medicinal woody tang of pine sol and the cool mildewed scent of old concrete which can't keep out the hardest rains. I was glad to see that there was only one other kid there, seated in the semicircle of metal folding chairs. It was Delaney. This was as anonymous as a Narratine meeting in Sawyer would get. Me and a girl who never talked to anyone at school. I sat a few spaces away. Our eyes met briefly and we smiled awkwardly. We talked for the first time over stale Food Lion cookies and watery orange punch served from milk jugs. I told her my grandparents brought me. She'd come on her own. She pummeled me with facts about the science of drug addiction, talking like her mind was running from something. We found out our mamas were working Narcotics Anonymous together. My mama would later lose the battle. Her mama hasn't lost yet, but things don't look promising. The next meeting we sat beside each other. That week at school we sat together at lunch. Ever since I first became aware that the world contains mysteries and incomprehensible wonders, I've tried to live as a witness to them. As we came to know each other, I began to see something in Delaney that I'd never seen in another person. I can't name that thing. Maybe it has no name, the way fire has no shape. It was something ferocious and consuming like fire. And I wanted to be close to it, the way people want to stand near a fire. We pull up to Delaney's half-brother's dad's house. Their scarred gray pit bull Duke strains at the swing set chain, binding him to a sickly oak tree in the overgrown lawn, giving us a terse series of hostile barks. A rusting washing machine and dryer mold on the sagging front porch. An algae scabbed above ground pool slouches in a corner of the yard. It looks as fun to swim in as an unflushed toilet. We both start talking at once. You go, Delaney says. Thank you, I say. My hesitation isn't ingratitude. Okay. I'm not saying no yet. You're not saying yes yet. It's a lot to think about. You're smart. Start thinking, Delaney says. We sit for a second, listening to the drone of the insect menagerie surrounding the house in the tall weeds. Pale neon yellow fireflies dance their luminous evening waltz. Delaney explained to me once how they make light. I've forgotten. Occasionally my mind lets me hold on to a bit of fragile magic in spite of practical explanations. Thanks for the blizzard, I say. Delaney opens her door. Thanks for the ride. Hey, Red? What? Delaney stops getting out and sits back in her seat. I always knew. What did you always know? You'd do something important. She looks happy. Yeah? You deserve all this. Your life is going to change so much. Not the part about us being friends. I'm not worried about that, but I didn't know where I was going with what I was saying. It just felt like a thing that needed to be said. I mean, she says, it'll be easier to stay in touch if we're at the same school. I reach over and yank the bill of her Dairy Queen hat down over her eyes. Go babysit. She pulls off her hat and smooths the wisps of her hair. Once more, she makes to leave. Red? Again, she pulls herself back into my truck. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time letting her go tonight. How'd you know that mold would be in that cave? You've never asked that before. Been curious for a long time. How'd I know? She looks at me and then into the chirping, humming half-light, then back at me. Because for every way the world tries to kill us, it gives us a way to survive. You just got to find it. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. That was wonderful. And I have to say, just first and foremost, you're a fantastic reader as well.
Oh, well, thank you.
I think, someone commented, Joanna commented in the chat, just the tension. And it's amazing how much tension you can get sort of implied within a relationship, without having them argue, without having them say what they're thinking, or even the narrator think exactly what he's thinking. But just, I got this huge sense of the difficulty he was having with the fact that this person who's special to him and he knows is so exceptional that she is now going to be possibly taken away. And also at the same time, while she's trying to give him this gift, part of me felt this sense that he would almost be, I don't know if I want to say emasculated, but there was some ego affliction that would happen if he was to just accept it. Right?
That's exactly right. And in a part later, he explains that he doesn't feel like he earned it. He wanted to earn it. And the other issue is that his grandfather, who he lived with after his mother died of a fentanyl overdose, is himself dying of emphysema. And so he would have to leave his grandfather to be away. And so that's a pretty significant source of concern for him.
Sure. Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is, writing about, unfortunately, what life has become in many small towns in America, particularly in rural parts of the country, with drug use. And I loved the line about, kids who have this sort of extra age on them because they've been forced to parent their parents. I think that's something that all of us can think instantly of an example in our lives. So I think that's also just a really relatable sort of setting. And, teenagers, it's such a Trina and I talk about, she teaches, as I believe, and she has put it to me as teenagers, young teenagers especially, get in this weird position where we have removed the protection of, oh, they're cute children, but we haven't extended them the privilege of being adults yet. So they're kind of in like the worst position. Like, and this, it sounds like this girl, she has this discovery, she has a job, she's got her mom to worry about. There's so much responsibility on there and so little available in terms of help. So it's a really interesting and relatable sort of set of characters to write about. So that's coming out this summer?
It's coming out in August. Yeah, August 2021.
Excellent. Well,
so it's a ways out.
It's a little ways. It'll be here before we know it, I assume.
That's right.
The days feel like months, but the months feel like days. It's a strange time.
Exactly.
At any rate, thank you very much, Jeff. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, and by the way, if anybody wants to catch up with Jeff on Twitter or his website or purchase his books, the links are in the chat. So go check that out. All right. Moving right along. Our next reader this evening is C. Kubasta. Her previous novels, This Business of the Flesh from Apprentice House and Girling from Brain Mill, explore small-town life through the interrelationships of complex and flawed protagonists. Her poetry is widely available in a variety of journals, and the poetry collections of Covenants, White Point Press, and All Beautiful and Useless from Blaze Vox. She lives, writes, and teaches in Wisconsin, where she continues to be fascinated by the subtleties of language, meaning, and the stories we choose to tell, as well as those we don't. All right, Christina, you should be able to unmute. And you can take it away.
Yep. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me tonight and being able to be here. I did get bumped off once, and so I dearly, dearly hope that I don't get bumped off again, because that would be embarrassing. Anyway, I've got a new book out, a collection of short stories called Objectification, and so I'm just going to read the beginning of one of those short stories. It's called Freak Show, and it's about sort of two people who've known each other for a long time, and also knew each other sort of in childhood and from their churches, and have sort of re-met up. So I think it'll start to make sense. Anyway, their names are Jeff and Megan. Megan has a bit of a thing for tattoos. Jeff's kind of into it, and then he gets freaked out. So the first part's about Megan. The garden and snakes and depictions of Eve and Lilith and Ruth and Naomi and Sarah and Hannah and Tamar and a whole bunch more whose stories he couldn't remember. But she did. He'd trace the vining shape and slow and stop and ask her about it, and she'd tell the story, still able to recite from memory and often tell the numbers of book and verse. She'd always been more attentive in classes. He remembered that. She'd go right from school to fellowship, always volunteering to help with the younger kids, staying after to clean up in the kitchen, usher for the service, plan and promote and assist with summer Bible camp. He remembered how she'd been one of the good girls, selected for honors like readings during service and scholarships from the congregation for college. She told him she dated some guy in college who had a stupid tattoo, some cartoon character, and multiple images around his belly. And he'd take off about how high he must have been when he had the idea, when he'd do the performance, maybe even when he got the tattoo. But she said he'd been sweet, if stupid, and take her to get the first one. Which one? Jeff asked. He couldn't look and noticed how she wasn't entirely covered. Her back piece grayed out just past the downward curve of her ash. All sorts of flowers, large blooms and small, violets and hibiscus and
Oh, I think we may have just lost Christina. I was trying to figure out if it was cutting in and out for anyone else. If she, yeah, this is the fun of doing a show on the internet, is that everyone comes with their own connections and abilities and technology, and sometimes we get tripped up. She is now here again, but let me see if she can unmute. This is also, it's interesting. We've actually had relatively few problems considering the fact that we've been doing this on Zoom. Christina, are you there?
I am.
Okay.
Can I turn off my video?
Sure, if that would assist. Or Jeff just pointed out, I think there is also an option on Zoom. We have we can call in with a phone instead. I can get you the number if that would be better. Ooh. It's okay. This is still smoother than we had one.
We once had a guest on the show who was like driving to find better Wi-Fi while she was reading. Like, so don't worry, Christina, you are not the first.
Yeah, try, if you would like, try turning off your video, and if not, I'm going to put a phone number in the chat, and you should be able to call in.
Well, then I feel less bad.
Oh yeah, no, this is you.
Can I turn off my video?
Yeah, go for that first, and hopefully that'll smooth things out. And if not, there is a phone number in the chat that you can use for the audio portion, and that might smooth it out too.
Is that better?
Still kind of cutting in and out, sorry.
Okay.
It's okay. Well, these are the things that, you know, what's funny though is it's way worse if you're doing a show in person though and things go wrong. I think everyone understands the business of internet connections. This is not not uncommon. So we will see if she can call back in.
Why don't we move on to our fourth reader?
That would be the best move. Chloe, are you ready? All right, so we'll go to you first. Let me just give you a little intro. So we're gonna shuffle things around here as we occasionally have to. It's really only happened once that we had to move things around. And that was the one where someone was having a family emergency, I believe. But technology emergency we'll take, because at least if it's just the internet, everyone's safe, everything's fine, all good, not that big a deal. We are flexible. Flexibility, by the way, is, I think, honestly, one of the greatest assets you can have. Being adaptable is so much more important than being right or being I don't know, just about anything. Insistent. I definitely don't want to be insistent. So we'll just we'll move things around. So Chloe Martinez is going to read next. She is a poet and scholar of South Asian religions. Her chapbook, Corner Shrine, was selected by Jeffrey Davis as the winner of the 2019 Backbone Press chapbook competition. And her poems have appeared in Waxwing, Prairie Schooner, The Common, and elsewhere, and have been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and Best New Poets. She's the program coordinator for the Center for Writing and Public Discourse at Claremont McKenna College, as well as a lecturer in religious studies. So, Chloe, you should be able to unmute yourself, and we can hear from you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. So good to be here. I just moved in from my backyard because it got too cold out there. So now I've got weird overhead lighting instead. It's really nice to be here. Thanks so much, Trina and Ridge and Noli, for inviting me. And it's been so great to hear you, Jeff and Suzanne. And hopefully we'll get Christina back. Okay, I'm going to read just a couple poems from my new chapbook called Corner Shrine. It's about India, so I study and teach about religions of India. And this book comes out of many years of traveling there and doing research there, and is sort of about the strangeness of being. It was interesting, Suzanne, listening to you read travel writing, right? I'm kind of in this middle place of like, not the tourist, I'm not from there either, right? So a lot of these poems are about that. This poem is called The Mirror Room, Marengar Fort. You live in a high fort above a blue city, the rooftops below speckled with laundry. At night, the distant echoes of 100 brass bands, 100 weddings. The blue of the city is not quite robin's egg, not exactly the blue of chicory. Outside the city is the desert. Don't tell it like a story, it will sound too beautiful. You stand on a high parapet in the rustle and coo of pigeons under filigreed eaves. When you step over red velvet ropes, leaving the museum behind, you find rooms empty as the moon, floors carpeted in desert silt. In one bedchamber turned cave, you hold your breath, you bow before a rank hill of bat guano, you touch niches for the ghosts of little lamps, and frescoed girls dance with gods along the wall. Plaster dusts your fingertips, stained glass windows turn your thin skin rainbow. You take a photo of a white hallway. Mughal arches echo, fade into light. Not a story, not an image, it is a map. At the end of the hallway, a balcony. The ground hazily distant, the wide-winged turkey vultures gliding so close, hold tight the railing. Notice how soft the sandstone carved into curling vines. Notice it is crumbling. Marengar means sun citadel. Shishmal means mirror palace, or else hall of mirrors, but it is just a tiny space, dim, claustrophobic with reflections. Wild, intimate room, it wants an audience. Here you are, alone with your 10,000 selves. I'm going to read another poem about the same place. So the very first time I went to India, I was an undergrad on study abroad, and I was in a study abroad program, and the program was housed in this like medieval fort in Rajasthan, which was amazing. So we were kind of living behind a museum, as the poem I just read explores. But this poem is also, I'm going to read another poem, which is more about a later trip that I took doing dissertation research with my husband. What we were doing was mostly traveling around while I was trying to get access to weird, obscure manuscripts in archives. So we would do that. And then we'd come home and be really hot and tired. It's kind of a manuscript research love poem. Manuscript of a long forgotten poet. For days, we may not speak more than a few words to anyone but each other. We leave the hotel in the cool morning, and we come back sweaty, drained of energy to stand before a huge cage of parakeets, watching them quick step sideways along their long stick perches. Courting, fighting? When we wash our hands, we turn the water brown as a flooded field. We kneel together sometimes for hours over a low table, as you turn the frail pages of a book 3 centuries old, and I try to catch each image and make it stay, sharpening the focus on the camera's little screen until I can see the mark someone made in red or black ink, and where the margin wasn't ruled straight, and when someone tried to cross a letter out and didn't quite. I adjust the lens, straighten the tripod legs, you hold the page extra still, we turn off the ceiling fan so that even the air won't move. The afternoon crawls along, sweltering. I can't imagine a more tedious, more tender thing. Okay, I'm going to read one more from this collection, and then I'll read just 2 newer poems. This poem is called Kerala. Kerala. Here is a sidewalk made of stones, balanced like children's blocks. Some have shifted or fallen in, revealing what's under them, air, and sometimes a trickle of water. Here is the heat of the day. Here is the problem of how to step across these spaces, whether this one that slants up will support us or not. Here's a movement at the edge of our field of vision. Let it not be cockroach, let it be leaf, candy wrapper, nothing. Oh, let us take note of the palm trees instead. Look up. They are everywhere. Here, crisscrossing the ground, are their shadows, We walk over them as one walks on a crosswalk, black, white, black, white, black. But let us keep moving. Do not be distracted by the gutter and its coconuts. You must be thinking coconuts here for the taking. The perfect food. It heals you from the heat, from your exhaustion. It is meat and water and oil all at once. It enriches a curry and silkens your hair. It is a rough, impenetrable skull of a thing. You must be thinking, how does one open a coconut anyway? Well, here is a man with a machete. For a few rupees, he'll drop one open and hand it to you with a pink plastic straw. Be grateful, take heart, sit down here, drink. Thank you. All right, I'm going to read two more recent poems. This one is called The Moon. It came out recently in Poetry Northwest. It's a poem that came out of a prompt. A friend said, write a poem, here's the line. If we can put a man on a moon, surely we can figure that out. People say that a lot now, right? We have a lot to figure out. So I thought, how many things can I make out of that? The moon. If we can put a man on the moon, surely we can figure this out. If the man puts out the moon, we can surely put that man figure out. The moon, cans on, man insures. We put out this figure, if. Put a figure on the can. We can out this. We can moon man on, surely. Out can the moon. Put a sure man. If we can, we figure this, we out it. The moon. Can a man be sure? Can we? Out. This man is a figure. The moon is a can. We put on the surely can. We out. Thank you. All right, this is the last poem I'm going to read. And this one also has a kind of a weird source. It came out of an online customer review of a Uniqlo bra. Sometimes you need the most ordinary stuff to talk about serious things. So the review was, it has a God structure. I think it will resist a long time. And the poem's called The God Structure. Oh, keep me up, keep me going, keep it together, smooth me, reduce excess movement. There is a heaviness, there is around me a God structure. It helps me organize my thoughts. It has laid out plans, I think, for various eventualities, and the existence of plans, though they change, is a comfort. This morning, the God structure led me to a vine that was drooping over the far edge of the front lawn covered with ripe blackberries. God structure said, eat them, and I did. The stain of them still on my hands when I heard that the God structure had also made a disease that is suddenly taking from my friend his body, among other things. It seems the God structure doesn't give a shit, has no alternate plan. Keep Googling it, nothing appears. His tongue tries to choke him in his sleep. His God structure is written into his code. It was always there, in silence, inevitable. Whatever has a God structure is real, is irresistible. Its tiny ticking bricks, its termite-riddled beams, picturesque and stupid, and also vast avenues that shape the light and the sea that makes us go on somehow after we look at it, and also flying buttresses that carry that weight, moving it outward until it becomes bearable. The God structure has no need of metal underwire. It lifts with mere stitches and foam. Beauty light, it won't hoist me too high, will it? God structure, maybe you don't listen, but if by chance you do, I could use just enough support to keep my tired breast in its hapless place, awaiting plans, awaiting some revelation. We speak on the phone, my friend's murderous tongue and me. We say at the end of the conversation, I'll let you go. The God structure has written us this script. We read it aloud. We hope to resist a long time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chloe. Those were beautiful. I think, again, exploring another culture, country, whatever you want to call it, and just dealing with the imagery of it and how it strikes us, I think is such an interesting place to start as far as your poems about India go. And hearing some of the maybe the natural world, the wildlife that's involved, but also some of the history with the Mughal arches and the sandstone and sort of these really like tactile. Again, it's sort of similar to Suzanne's in the sense of like a good description really gets me somewhere, instantly. And I think that puts me in a very at least for myself as a listener to poetry, it puts me in a very receptive space for whatever comes right behind it. The message, the mood, the other portions of what's going on with the person that day. And then I also just loved the moon poem, just the play with language, because at times I will admit I was completely confused hearing it out loud. I'm sure reading it might be a little, it's probably a different experience reading it on a page. No, maybe. But at the same time, there were these sort of like almost what's smaller than an aphorism? I don't know, phrases that sort of just popped out and were like, oh, there's a piece of meaning. There's another piece of meaning. Ooh, that could mean that. And I think that's so much fun. And similarly, taking a misspelled internet review of a product, at least I assume it was misspelled and they meant good structure. I don't know. Maybe they meant it's such a good structure that it's worthy of God. Who knows? But I think those are such wonderful, playful places to start, and it's very easy it's very easy at times to take things too seriously in terms of artistic work and composition, especially. I think maybe honestly, whenever I find myself making these grand platitude longitudinal statements, I realize that I'm just talking about myself. So for myself, it's easy to get stuck in sort of whether it's self-seriousness or obsessing on the form, things like that. So I think having a little bit of room for play is wonderful. And I also think coming in, I really appreciate you sharing that with us too, because, again, using myself as an example, I've read something on this show once and I was like, no one must know that I have no idea what I'm doing. No one must know that I just made this up. It has to feel like I found it in a treasure chest somewhere and I'm just presenting it. And I think just sort of admitting like, sometimes I use a weird prompt and I get somewhere I wasn't expecting to go is just such a wonderful sort of message to put out there, to be, playful with creativity. So your chapbook's available now. And I think Noli can put the links to all that in the chat. And then I believe Christina should be good now. So let's try this. We got the audio coming through the phone. I just requested that she unmute. Let's see if it works. Oh, hello.
Is this working?
Yes.
Does it work? Okay. Am I loud enough?
You sound great. Yes, you can take it away.
Okay. I'm going to be conservative and not put on my video.
All right. Fair enough. Yeah.
Is that all right? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for sticking with me. Hopefully this will work. So I'm just going to pick up. Megan has a whole bunch of tattoos, and we're going to carry on. Okay. Jeff tried to think about what he was doing then, when Megan was dating some guy who liked to take off his shirt and spin around to make his cartoon tattoo come alive. Maybe he and his wife were up nights with the baby, starting to spin apart. No sleep, no sex, wondering what they had in common or why they got married. When their baby girl died, all of a sudden, with no one to blame, they'd each flung free of everything they'd been holding on to. By the time Megan would decide she didn't like the tattoo and begin the long process of covering the skin that was almost always covered anyway, Jeff would have done some terrible things to cover the guilt he felt about abandoning his wife when she needed him most. He'd asked Megan where that first tattoo had been, and she'd touched low on her back, somewhere near the figure of Sarah. Megan would disappear sometimes, for a few weeks, claiming she was busy with work, but he figured out that it was because she was having some new work done, a large piece, and didn't want to be touched or bothered during the healing. She'd return after the scabbing was done, the grayed feathering of ink and skin that shed when it was touched, and she'd return to her regular smoothness, with a new design patterning down the long planes of her thighs, or circling her biceps or forearms. Sometimes these multi-step processes occurred over several months, and each grew until they touched one another, filling in the spaces of cream skin. Each time she showed him something new, it was like the reveal of the first night. He'd never know what it would be because it was hidden beneath full-sleeved shirts and long pants. And then when she disrobed, there'd be something new to absorb the light. He became attuned to the subtle variation of brand new versus slightly aged tattoos, the way even black ink was slightly blued. But on her, they all started to seem like shades of Vanta black, absorbing more light than seemed natural. Some trick of the lab, a black hole of chaos embedded in her skin. He'd read about Vanta black somewhere, that it held the world's record for the darkest man-made substance, absorbing even more than visible light. Coated with it, three-dimensional objects appeared two-dimensional. Megan's body being remade seemed to absorb all light too. Even in a pitch-black room, she was its darkest center. Sometimes he thought he was disappearing into her. Sometimes he thought he wanted to disappear into her, the way they fucked. He'd go harder and harder, only stopping when she put her ghost white hand on his chest and pushed back. After he and his wife lost their little girl, the middle of the night baby monitor gone quiet, and her infant body already cold when he went to check on her as he was pacing the house around 5 a.m. Their house had become a black hole, but it hadn't been much more than that even before. They'd married when she got pregnant, months before either of them would have thought of it on their own. At the wedding, each of the professionally taken photos revealed his pinched smiles, and the way she tried to not rest her hands on her belly, to keep the secret until after the ceremony as much as they could. Their parents knew, of course, and had been eager to go all in for the wedding, as long as there was a wedding. Whether or not the bride and groom were really in love or really ready hadn't been anyone's concern. The baby on the way made it so. God had spoken. So when Jeff had lifted his daughter out of the bassinet, tucked inside the crib she'd never grow into, and felt her heaviness, the way she had already cooled, he wondered immediately, before he could stop himself, if God had spoken again. Maybe God had been speaking all along, in the quiet spaces of the house laced with resentment, in the ways his wife rolled over and sighed heavily whenever he tried to touch her, in the metallic sound of the sofa pullout that he made into his bed most nights in the living room. But he didn't have anyone to blame, God or otherwise, for what he'd done after that. Sure, he hadn't been prepared for the kind of grief and guilt and anger and shame that settled on him in the intervening days after their little girl died. But when he held her that first morning and knew she was gone, he could have made a different decision. What he decided was to put her back in her crib and leave early for work so that his wife would find her and have to deal with it alone. And when he got the call and come back home, he never came clean that he was anything but caught out and devastated. He walked back into his house, all pretended surprise and world come crashing down, and accepted being held and the love of his mother and mother-in-law, and never told any of them that he'd orchestrated that moment to save himself and leave his poor kid of a wife adrift on her own. A few days later, he accepted his wife's sister holding him, and that had been his doing too. And then I just skipped to a little bit later when he and Megan are in bed together, and he's asking about getting a tattoo. How much does it hurt? She laughed. Not much. She turned her head so she was looking up at the ceiling. Depends where. Depends on how long it takes. Skin gets more sensitive after a while if it takes more than a few hours. She was still lacing her fingers through his and went on to mention the difference between bone, muscle, certain areas of fat like her ass, the soft sides of stomach. She told him about sitting in the waiting area and some dude bro trying to chat her up, thinking she might be nervous, that it was her first time, that she was there for some cute butterfly or maybe an inspirational quote. Jeff had never been into a tattoo shop, let alone hers, but he'd driven past it a bunch of times, slowed down and looked into the windows. He could picture the dark leather couches, the private rooms beyond. He could picture her sitting there waiting, fully covered, maybe in a ribbed turtleneck sweater or a long-sleeve t-shirt that hid everything. And he could see the kind of guy she was talking about now, in short sleeves with tribal tattoos and barbed wire wrapping his biceps and forearms, scoping her out and reassuring her about her appointment. Megan said she and the artist had a good laugh at that. The artist, the only one she went to now, who did all the designs and all her work, Writer told her he'd cried during his back piece and tried to say it was allergies. She said men cry more than women anyway, but always try to pretend they're the tough ones. That reminded Jeff of something his dad had told him once. You can't trust a woman because she'll bleed for days but never die. Jeff had been young, 11 or 12, and hadn't understood what he meant. Maybe it was a joke. After he went home that day, his house full of women, his wife, his mother, mother-in-law, sister-in-law, he'd thought of that again. The hole that had been torn in their world by the dying of their daughter was being closed by those women, and he had no place in it. The healing or the new world. Maybe what he'd done with his wife's sister was some kind of attempt to remake the hole and fit himself back in. In that moment, he understood what his father was saying, was that he was afraid of women, and that Jeff should be too. Thanks for bearing with me. I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, sure. No problem. First of all, technology things happen. Thank you for working to get back on and read for us. That was amazing. That secret of his, that's a gut punch and a half right there. I mean, I could feel this sort of distance, tension, ugly feeling between them. And at first, as I was listening, I was like, oh, well, they lost a child. That explains it. They're both having their own reactions to it. And then when you get to the idea of him misleading everybody about it and using that to gain sympathy, it's really, so that's for a character trait or a twist or something that tells you a lot about a guy, I guess I would say. That's a heck of one. And then also, I like the imagery and the metaphor, I don't know whether metaphorical or not, of her sneaking off to get tattoos and go through this process where she's sort of safely injured and also gets to reclaim herself, because that's, you're both claiming a part of your body and you're also, she's experiencing pain, and then she gets to experience the healing of that on her own and wants to do so without his interference. Such an interesting sort of set of two examples to explore, like the dynamic of a really troubled relationship.
So you don't think it's going to end well for them?
I don't, stranger things may have happened. I don't know, but I get the feeling that they are not on their way to it sounds like from the very beginning, maybe they weren't on their way to a happy ending, but certainly the things that happened along the way. So this is in a book of short stories?
Yes. Yeah. So my collection of Objectification just came out in October. Although there's one I would say that's sort of horror, the others are sort of, I would say each have sort of an underpinning of maybe a little bit of reference to a horror theory or something like that. And so even though they're not sort of genre horror, I think there's sort of some references throughout.
Sure. Well, definitely. I'm a huge, as you may be able to tell from my shirt, I'm a huge horror movie fan, and horror has recently milled the grieving parents thing pretty frequently. Having two people lose a child, and then the way those two people react to it, whether it then involves some supernatural element or just them devolving into madness or whatever it is. So that's awesome. And also just the title, Objectification, is wonderful. Is that this is silliness, but is that an actual word, or is that just a portmanteau?
It's a hashtag.
Ooh,
does that make it a word?
Sure. We should. So are you saying you use it as a hashtag, or people should use it as a hashtag in order to reach you?
Well, no, I think that when one thinks one is being original, you should go and check to see if it's already a hashtag. So I think it's a hashtag in reference to sort of a number of conversations.
Okay. Well,
so it is out there a little bit. I thought it was, I was being witty, and then discovered that other people, of course, their wit precedes me.
Oh, I mean, everything we try to create, someone may have gotten to it first, but that doesn't
Right, exactly.
No, I think making people that actually Trina just pointed out in the chat, this show was originally called The Great Indoors because we were all stuck inside. And it turns out that is the name of a very popular home decor podcast that I have actually gotten emails to by accident. Someone emailed me asking what I would suggest for decorating to help their friend who suffers from seasonal depression. And I just awkwardly never wrote back because I don't know. But anyways, yeah, I mean, there is there's an element to that, but I think also, I don't know. It just abject is just such a word of, people associated with failure, people associated with disgrace, people associated with all these things. So to mix that with objectification, I think is a wonderful sort of mashup. And it's sort of, I don't know, personally, having heard that and even just seeing the title, I would like to learn more. So there's a link above in the chat to the bookshop link for that. And again, Christina, thank you so much for bearing with the technology difficulties as well. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So I'm just going to wrap things up now. And then, by the way, people want to hang out, feel free. We'll leave the show room open for a while. If any people have questions for the readers or just things they'd like to raise on their own, we always like to do that in the spirit of fostering community. For now, the best way to keep up with the show is on Twitter. It is not at The Great Indoors. It is at TGI Cast. You can also go to tgicast.com, which has a list of the upcoming events, an archive of previous events, and a little bit about the show and the three people responsible for it, which is myself. You can find me on Twitter at Ridge Cresswell if you need to. You can find the show's creator and spiritual backbone / diabolical Kiwi, Trina Thibodeau, at TREENATHIBS. And you can find the show's booker, scheduler, most professional one among us, Noli Reed, at Noli Reed. That reminds me, if you have people you'd like to hear on the show or recommendations for us, this entire show has worked from the beginning of March to, I believe it's now about 175 writers who have read their work on this show, as well as several visual artists who presented theirs. That's run entirely on recommendations and friendship and discussions and, social networking in the way that it used to be back when people talked to each other instead of just pretending to be a business online and getting sold exercise clothes by targeted marketing. There was a time when social networking actually involved speaking to one another. So if you have people you think would be a good fit for us, or actually, as Trina pointed out, Twitter stalking, sometimes we're just a fan of somebody and we take a chance and message them on Twitter, and it's worked a couple times. So please, send them our way. We really appreciate it. And for now, I'm going to say goodnight. And, I hope this next week is less wacky than this past one was. That's really all I can say. So thank you all for being here as always. And let's get on with the socializing portion. So.
Okay.